This is Bill O'Brien, and welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Today is Tuesday. It is the 17th day of May in the year 2016. It is a pleasure to be with you here once again on the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility. Apologize for not being with you yesterday. I'm sure many of you saw Bob Kincaid's Facebook entry. Had a few problems. I think most of them, we thought all of them had been worked out, but now we find out as we went to go on the air today that we were still having a few technical problems that Bob's going to have to work out. So I apologize for that, but we are on the air. It is a pleasure to be with you today, and I'm probably not sure that our phones are going to be working the way they usually do. At least Bob and I didn't have a chance to talk about that. We were just trying to get on the air. So I'm not going to give you the phone number today. And again, if some of you are inclined to call in, then by all means try. But if it doesn't work, please don't be upset. Our phone number, as you know, is area code 304-663-4676. But I'm not sure that this is going to work today. If you do have a reaction to the program, I do solicit your input, your ideas, suggestions, concerns, whatever. So with that, let me give you my email address, and we'll kind of go from there. We're having a little bit of problems. I just received a call on the phone. I thought it may be a connection problem here, and it was not. So I apologize for that short delay. My email address is waobrien906@gmail.com. That's waobrien, OBRIEN 906@gmail.com. I do encourage you, if you do have a reaction, I would love to hear from you. I really would like to have some input on some of these issues, and especially the issues we'll be dealing with today. If these issues are of concern to you or of interest to you, and you have specific ideas or suggestions or concerns or whatever that relate to them, we would love to hear from you, and I know our audience would as well. So if you would email me at waobrien906@gmail.com, I would be glad to share our those concerns, those issues with our listeners here at the Virtual Center. I also encourage you to check on our Facebook page regularly. I've posted a number of issues there over the last 4 or 5 days. In fact, one of the postings, not the most recent one. The most recent one was one that I just put on last evening, and it related to an article in yesterday's Charleston, West Virginia Gazette. But we're not going to, we won't have time to deal with it today. But it'll be there. It'll be there for a future program. But again, if I do solicit your reaction or your response to these entries on Facebook, because these postings are opinion driven. The purpose of them is to solicit response, solicit input, debate, discussion, dialogue, whatever you want to call it, because I really do believe that the issues are critically important. I need to open today's program with with some information which I think is relevant on my end, and I know Bob Kincaid doesn't even know this yet because I haven't had a chance to chat with him. We usually have an opportunity to chat for a few minutes before we go on the air, but as I say, today we spent most of the time just trying to get on the air, so we didn't have a time to share our thoughts and our ideas and our news and information. I have an obligation tomorrow. We are doing an economic development forum here in Southern West Virginia tomorrow, the title of which is Rise Up Southern West Virginia. And I have been asked to make a brief presentation at that program And so I have registered to be an attendee. It is an all-day program. It begins at 9 a.m. and it goes right through 4 p.m. tomorrow. So I will be at that conference. And so therefore we will not be doing a live broadcast of the Virtual Center tomorrow. I might also share with you, and again, I'll have to go over this with Bob once we get off the air today, that I will be traveling to New England this Thursday and not returning until next Monday night. So we will not have a live program next Monday either here at the Virtual Center. So what that means is that the next time that we get together live here on the Virtual Center will be next Tuesday, 1 week from today, at our 1:30 p.m. start time, our half-hour late start time, which is very traditional for our program on Tuesdays. I kind of apologize for this because we've had a kind of a rocky couple of week or so here at the Virtual Center, having no program yesterday, having some technical difficulties one day last week, and then for me to be tied up tomorrow and out of town for Monday's program creates a little bit of interruption in the flow of thought and ideas here at the Virtual Center, and I apologize for that. Let me make another comment before we get into some substance on today's program. I haven't had a chance, as I say, to share these thoughts with Bob Kincaid, but I do want to share them with you, the listeners. I think many of you saw Bob's Facebook entry yesterday about the fact that literally we had no power. And as Bob said on Facebook, the issue is money related, and it wouldn't be resolved until that was resolved. And obviously we are back on the air today. So that particular issue has been addressed. It obviously has not been resolved. I think those of you who are regular listeners and regular followers of the Head On Radio Network and also of this program, the Virtual Center, and again, we've been on now for 3 years and 2 months. So we've got some distance, so some, our feet are pretty well planted on the ground, so to speak. We've been on that long. We started on the 11th of March in the year 2013. So we're 2 months into our 4th year of broadcasting here at the Virtual Center. And again, we've had some rocky times. We're dealing with obviously a very thin, tenuous budget. I think Bob makes that very clear every single night on his program here on the Head On Radio Network. And many of you have been so kind, because literally that kindness has kept this program and these programs and that network on the air. It's really a very tenuous, difficult, stress-ridden operation. There's absolutely no question. Bob was so upset yesterday when he let me know that we weren't going to be able to do a program, because I didn't know until 5 minutes before we were due to start yesterday that we weren't doing a program. So I had put in a couple of hours yesterday morning putting together a program. I was ready to go yesterday. And then 5 minutes before we were due to start, I found out that we couldn't do a program. And Bob was really upset by that. He didn't even, he didn't really feel comfortable even bringing that news to me. And again, he needn't feel that way. My point of my point here is to stress how tenuous, and at the same time to reemphasize how very, very important it is that this particular voice stay on the air. We have got to find stable, secure funding. It doesn't cost a lot to keep this program running, to keep this network running. But it does have to be there, because bills have to be paid, and bills have to be paid when they come due. They aren't huge bills. When you think of some of the networks and some of the costs of keeping some of these programs that we read, that we listen to and watch through the year on the air, their budgets are huge. We don't have that kind of a budget. But at the same time, we have bills, we have responsibilities that we need to meet. And those of you who are regular listeners to the Head On Radio Network know that every single evening Bob has to take his hat off, hold it out, and hope that people will put enough in the hat to keep the program on the air until the next time that he is required to take that hat off. It's a very, very tenuous, stress-ridden way to do a program. It's very difficult to maintain your focus on the issues that the programs are about when you have those kinds of considerations and those kinds of concerns all the time. So the reason I'm here today, even mentioning this, is because I'm kind of on the outside looking in here. And I feel terrible because I personally can't do a whole heck of a lot to help out. And it pains me. It really does. And, I'm living on a retirement budget, and I know many of the folks out there are doing the same kinds of things. And it's taken me a long time to get used to living on a retirement budget. And I don't know that I've actually, managed that very well as yet. So, there are quite a few things going on that make it difficult. So at the same time, I keep saying if I ever hit Powerball or something like that, all of the problems of the Head On Radio Network would be over. And I know many of you feel the same way, but you can't obviously run a program or bank on a program with that kind of funding. So funding expectations. So I'm really asking people to kind of put on their thinking caps and think of ways that we may be able to secure some stable fund. Doesn't have to be a whole heck of a lot. But if we could secure just enough to pay the basic bills and keep the program on the air, then we can address the issues of replacing some of the outdated equipment and things like that. But first things first. So, I really do hope that if, wherever possible, anything that we can do to help Bob out and to help keep this network and these programs on the air. He's been doing this now for 10 years or so, probably a little bit more than that. And how he's been able to do it, I don't know. I don't know that I want to know, because I think the old image of chewing gum holding the whole operation together may not be totally misplaced here. I just think it's miraculous that we are able to do this. But at the same time, now that I've gotten well over 3 years of full programming under my belt, so to speak, and I look back on what we've done, what we've been able to do, and what the Head On Radio Network itself has been able to do, and Bob's appearances with Chris Hayes and those kinds of things on MSNBC, we've got a gold mine, a diamond in the rough here. We've got to find a way to make sure that it becomes secure and stable, something that our listeners can depend on. So when they go to that particular link, they know that this network and this program that's supposed to be there will be there. So that's really all I've got to say. I just wanted you to know that it's a concern of mine. I know Bob doesn't like to talk about it all the time. I don't usually talk about it. But under the circumstances, I think it is appropriate that we do it today. Let me share with you. I mentioned the all-day conference that I'll be attending tomorrow. It's a conference entitled Rise Up Southern West Virginia, and it's co-sponsored by a number of church groups here in Southern West Virginia, along with the New River Regional Development Authority and the United Way of Southern West Virginia, which really serves. I think the United Way now serves about 7 or 8 counties in Southern West Virginia. This area is experiencing poverty issues that are unbelievable. And basically, the purpose of this conference is to bring the resources that already exist in this region together. Let's put on our thinking caps. Let's eliminate the borders or the parameters. In other words, let's all step outside the box for the day. and let's sit down in groups and let's figure out how we ourselves can begin to initiate some economic development initiatives here, rather than look outside for grant money and all of these other things, which have all been temporary fixes. When you had the right people running Congress in Washington, and people that were not ideological opposed to these kinds of things, there seemed to be money available for many of these kinds of programs. But the minute the political situation changes, the money dries up, the programs phase out, the people being served are left without those services, and we're back to the drawing board once again. And this has happened in this region over and over again. Finally, people in this region have pretty well decided that if we're going to be able to get out of this mess, we're going to have to do a lot of it ourselves. So what tomorrow is about is the beginning of a process, hopefully, where people and agencies and institutions in this region can come together, put their heads together, and start to look at some of the strategies that we might be able to initiate ourselves, with the idea that if we got help from outside, great. But to a certain extent, we'd be addressing many of our basic needs ourselves, and therefore we wouldn't necessarily remain totally dependent on outside resources to help us out. In many ways, that's not very different than what we've been talking about here with this program and this network, the Head On Radio Network. It's the same kind of thing. And I know that right now, as I'm on the air right now, I know that many of the people who are regular listeners to this program are members of this Head On Radio Network family. And so what I'm basically saying is, family, let's put our thinking caps on and figure out how we can take the bull by the horns and come up with ways to create the kind of solid financial foundation necessary to keep this network and these programs on the air. Because as long as it's tenuous, as long as it's day to day, as long as it's check in the, living day to day, check to check, as it were, then basically all we can do is concentrate on staying alive. We really can't do new things. We can't try new things. We can't engage in new initiatives. We don't have the luxury to do that. That's what we're looking for. It's no different than this very region of southern West Virginia that we're broadcasting from. So again, I hope you will take some of the words that I said. I don't know if I put this very well. I didn't plan it necessarily. It's just there, and it's something that I felt that I had to get off my chest. So if apologies in order, then be assured that I apologize. If the cause seems to warrant the concerns that I have, and apologies are not necessary for raising these issues, then I appreciate that as well. The point is that the issues themselves need to be addressed, and we need to address them, all of us, because we are all part of the Head On Radio Network family. And as such, we all have a piece of skin in this game, so to speak. We have ideological and political and social and economic skin in this game. And so therefore, it involves and concerns all of us. If it didn't, none of us would be here. So with that, let's kind of move into our regular programming here at the Virtual Center. I mentioned that one of the issue that I was going to lead with today, is a Facebook posting that I put on over the past weekend. I intended to cover it yesterday, since it was fresh then. I think I put it put the posting on Facebook on this past Saturday night. But since we didn't have a program yesterday, I thought that I would begin today's program with this. And so again, we're beginning very late. We're close to the top of the hour, which means we've got just a little bit better than 1 hour to go. here in today's program. On the other hand, usually on Tuesdays, as you regular listeners know, we don't usually stop and take a break. We usually go through for the full 90 minutes. So I'd like to do that. One of the issues, and of course, everybody is captivated by the elections, and as we know, there were two primaries underway today. The state of Kentucky and the state of Oregon are engaged in their primaries today, and the prognosticators are basically saying on the Democratic side that Bernie Sanders has a good chance, seems to be in the lead, at least according to the polls in Oregon, and is close enough to Secretary Clinton, to Hillary Clinton in Kentucky, that also could become a real race. Earlier on, the polls suggested that Hillary was 4 or 5 points ahead in the polls. But as one commentator mentioned this morning, all of that was before Hillary gave the speech in which she talked about the fact that we're going to be eliminating a lot of coal jobs and putting a lot of coal companies out of business. And in a state like Kentucky, as it was last week here in West Virginia, that's a pretty powerful statement, and it's going to be reflected in election outcomes. So a lot of people believe that that's going to cost Hillary Clinton, that issue. And the assumption is then that the result will be a substantial number of votes moving into the column for Bernie Sanders. Then there is the fact that Kentucky is one of those states that seems to be a strong Donald Trump state. And the fact of the matter is, many of those who intend to vote for Donald Trump in the November election are adamant in issuing a blow, so to speak, to Hillary Clinton. So many of them will find a way to vote for Bernie Sanders. So what we're liable to see is a surge in support for Bernie Sanders in Kentucky that actually might put him over the top. It's hard to tell. Although the chances are that he'll do quite well in Oregon. And then, of course, we've had the circus that continues to perform under the big top, as it were, on the Republican side, and that continues to go apace. So the issue, of course, is we're still fighting the issue of whether, in fact, we want one of the criticisms of Hillary Clinton's campaign is that she seems to have hitched her wagon pretty firmly to Barack Obama. And many of the Republicans are basically saying that a vote for Hillary Clinton is a vote for 4 more years of Barack Obama. And the implication of that is that we will continue to have a push for big government and efforts within a Republican-controlled Congress, House of Representatives pretty surely, and Senate, if the Republicans can maintain control of it, to block those initiatives of the government. And I just couldn't pass it up anymore. I just was so frustrated on Saturday night because I'm hearing some of the arguments which at some point seemed to border on the absurd. And the issue in question, the issue that prompted me to sit down at the computer and post something on Facebook, was the issue of whether, in fact, the nation benefits from or suffers from an aggressive, visible, active, leadership-focused government or not. And it goes back to the traditional debate between those people who believe, conservatives who believe, that if government is visible and government is active and government is aggressive, then individual liberties are in jeopardy. And the contrary, the other side of that, the flip side, being that if government is quiet and government is reticent and government is not aggressive and government is invisible, then the result of that is that individual freedom is going to be maximized. And the fact of the matter is that position so directly flies in the face of the traditions and the principles and the ideals and the values on which this republic was founded, that it just seems to scream for comment. And so I commented. And basically, this time, I didn't go to James Madison so much. I went to Alexander Hamilton. But again, you could go to Madison. We know that Madison has said that a republic demands a government that plans, that leads, that addresses problems, that identifies problems, defines problems, and addresses problems. We spent the last 2.5 to 3 weeks here at the Virtual Center talking about Madison's role in the emergence of a party system within Congress in the early 1790s. We talked about the what I think, very informative letter that Madison placed in the National Gazette in January of 1792, in which he laid out a 5-step formula or 5-step agenda that government needed to follow in order to make sure that Republican government in this nation could be successful. And in our last program, which was last Wednesday, we spent time focusing on 2 items of that 5-step formula. And it dealt with the issues of economic inequality. And Madison laid out a program and basically made it clear that inequality could be the greatest threat to the operation of this republic. And the reason it's significant is because right now in this nation, we are experiencing some of the most extreme inequality that we've ever seen. We've seen a pretty much complete recovery from the recession of 2007, 2008. But we've also seen a situation where most of the profit, most of the benefits of that recovery have gone directly to the 1%. We have reached a point, President Obama talked about this over the weekend, we have reached a point in this society where the top 10% of income earners in this country control 50% of the income earned. In other words, all the money made in our economy is being divided up, half to the top 10%, the other half to the other 90%. You can't maintain a republic that way. It won't work. Madison pointed that out in 1792. And one of the steps that he laid out for government was the fact that government had to make sure that the wealthy, those who already had all the advantages going into a competitive situation, government could not afford to make additional benefits or perks available to those people that didn't even need them. In other words, the last thing government needed was to initiate policies and programs that made it possible for those few with all the advantages going in to gain additional advantage from the policies and programs of government itself. So one of Madison's point is Government had to deny the wealthy additional opportunities or additional advantages. Rather, government needed to do everything that it could do without violating the rights of private property. Very important. Without violating the rights of public property. Government needed to do everything that it could do to minimize inequality in our society by doing everything it can to bring pressure down from the top and pressure up from the bottom in order to force more equality into the system, which is naturally moving in the other direction. In other words, government needed to use tax policies and other advantages or powers that it had to minimize inequality in our society. Do everything that it could, as Madison said in 1792, to lift up the indigent. And at the same time, do everything that it could do to put pressure from above on those who needed to constantly be reminded that they live in a republic and that they have responsibilities to the community at large. And this is not all about them and all about how much money they can make and how much wealth they can control. It's about the total wealth and the total well-being of the entire community. And when that is secure and that receives the priority status or the priority attention that it should achieve, then the republic is strong. And for that, we look to government. Government has a distinct, important role to play, literally, in making sure that our republic survives. So to continue to put out this claptrap, these facetious, stupid arguments about reducing government, about starving the beast by forcing cuts, more and more cuts in programs and services for the people who need them. Well, at the same time, you're cutting taxes and minimizing the responsibilities of the people with the most wealth and the most influence in the society is counterproductive to the point that it's absurd. It's stupid. It's short-sighted. It's naive. And it's damn well dangerous. But that's not what I put on Facebook. Instead, I went to Alexander Hamilton, and most specifically to the series of Federalist Papers in which Hamilton addressed Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States, which dealt with the issue of executive power. Because what we have in our country right now, in our nation right now, is a political stalemate. We have a chief executive, President Obama, who is being denied and blocked at every avenue by a Republican-controlled Senate from exercising the legitimate powers as well as the questionable ones of the executive branch. Article 2, the Constitution of the United States, lays out a strategy, lays out a formula for replacing a justice of the Supreme Court when a vacancy occurs. The Senate has chosen to not participate in the process laid out in the Constitution. It is denying the president the opportunity to fill a slot on the Supreme Court of the United States by giving President Obama's nominee even a hearing. And instead, holding out for the fall elections in November on the assumption that if Donald Trump happens to win the White House in November, chances are the Senate will be presented with a candidate closer in ideology to the deceased Antonin Scalia than the candidate that President Obama has proposed to them to replace Antonin Scalia. So in a sense, what we've got is a government that's dysfunctional. Every program, it seems, that comes out of the White House is blocked in the Senate. Every initiative. Zika funding. The president requested $3 billion to deal with what promises to be a summer in which we experience a serious outbreak, potential outbreak of mosquito-borne Zika virus, which in the minds of many knowledgeable people in the medical field carries with it the potential of becoming an epidemic. That funding has been blocked. Democrats and Republicans alike have been agreeing since 2011, 2012, 2013 that the infrastructure in this country needs serious attention. It needs a massive outlay of capital. We have a large number of people in this country that are underemployed. In the region that I'm speaking from right now in West Virginia, we have able-bodied miners who are out of work with no place to go, no jobs. These people could easily become the manpower, provide the manpower to address many of the infrastructure problems facing the nation. The will is there. But every time President Obama has made a proposal for the expenditure of funds to address the problem of infrastructure and create jobs in the process, it's been blocked. And what President Obama has sought to do in this, the last portion of his second administration, is to find loopholes in many cases or opportunities to utilize his executive power to make executive decisions and take actions that do not require Senate approval, to the point that many Republicans have accused him of abuse of office and committing impeachable offenses because he has sought to expand the power of the executive beyond what the Constitution of the United States allows. That's the situation in Washington. That's the dysfunction. It's absurd. It's stupid. In Federalist number 70, Alexander Hamilton addressed the issue of executive power. And I've got a couple of quotes, a couple of paragraphs from Federalist number 70 in which Alexander Hamilton deals with the power of the executive. We already know from Madison's letter of 1792, plus much of what he said in speeches and on the floor of the Constitutional Convention, about the issue of Republican government on the one hand and the importance of an aggressive executive on the executive branch on the other. That's why I decided for the Facebook posting that it might be beneficial to go elsewhere than back to Madison. So I went to Alexander Hamilton and specifically to Federalist number 70. This is the very first sentence of Federalist number 70. And this is from the opening couple of paragraphs of that particular Federalist paper dealing with the issue of executive power. Hamilton says the following: there is an idea, which is not without its advocates, that a vigorous executive is inconsistent with the genius of Republican government. That's Hamilton's opening sentence in Federalist number 70. That there are people out there who are claiming that to have a vigorous executive president is inconsistent with the idea of Republican government. Hamilton says in number 70 that this is wrong. And his explanation for that is as follows, quote, energy in the executive is a leading character in the definition of good government. It is essential to the protection of the community against foreign attacks. It is not less essential to the steady administration of the laws, to the protection of property against those irregular and high-handed combinations which sometimes interrupt the ordinary course of justice, to the security of liberty against the enterprises and assaults of ambition, of faction, and of anarchy. Unquote. Hamilton's point in Federalist number 70 is not only is an aggressive executive not contrary to the success of Republican government, it is absolutely critical to that success. These people are wrong, Hamilton says, who question a visible executive branch. They don't know what they're talking about. Hamilton says it's not a threat to a strong, aggressive executive branch is not a threat to liberty. It's a guarantee that liberty will be meaningful and will prevail. It seems to me that if one takes Hamilton and applies him to the debates, to the arguments that we're hearing all the time between President Obama on the one hand and Mitch McConnell on the other, we begin to appreciate just how political McConnell's positions are. What we begin to see is the reason why President Obama felt that he had no alternative except to find ways to initiate programs, policies, and activities by using his executive power and doing end runs about around the need for Senate approval of anything. Because it's very clear, Mitch McConnell made it very clear when President Obama was elected the first time in 2008 that his number one priority was that Obama be a one-term president. And then when President Obama was reelected in 2012, Mitch McConnell made it very clear that he was going to use the Republican strength in the Senate to block every conceivable action that President Obama would try to make during his entire administration. Mitch McConnell promised dysfunction in government, and he got it. And to turn around and criticize the president for trying to find ways to do his job and to do what the Constitution of the United States empowers him to do is ludicrous. It's hypocritical. It's downright absurd. Hamilton went even further in Federalist Number 70. And in the third paragraph of that document, Hamilton addressed the issue of a feeble executive, a weak president, and said the following: a feeble executive implies a feeble execution of the government. A feeble execution is but another phrase for a bad execution. And a government ill executed, whatever it may be in theory, must be in practice bad government. What Hamilton is saying about what we've witnessed over the last 8 years of the Obama presidency is that we have witnessed bad government because dysfunction rather than cooperation amongst the branches, in order that the different branches of government could carry out their legitimate constitutional powers, have been sabotaged. The reality is, and I'm going back to Madison here for a moment, under those circumstances, Madison predicted that Republican government would not survive. Let me say to those of you who are listening right now to the Virtual Center, this election that we are currently involved in, the election that will culminate on November 8th, 2016, may literally be the coming apart of the Republic. This election might indeed be the fulfillment of Madison's prediction. If indeed it is, if the nation as we know it does not survive the election of 2016, then it seems to me that we would have little choice but to look back on the dysfunction that existed amongst our two parties at the upper levels of government in Washington, the hostility and the conflict between Mitch McConnell and President Obama. We must look at those, it seems to me, as the beginning of the end of the Republic, if indeed Madison's prediction is correct. Just today, today is Tuesday. Tomorrow morning, Wednesday, the 18th, the Hillary Clinton administration campaign is beginning to run two election ads in 4 states. They have they are spending more than $100 million in 4 key states: Nevada, Ohio, Florida, and Virginia, I believe. And last evening, those two political ads were shown on TV. MSNBC ran them. And this morning, all the networks ran them. They are vicious. They are aimed specifically at the personality and the character of Donald Trump. It suggests that we're in for one of the most personality-driven, negative, vile presidential campaigns in history. Hillary Clinton hasn't even secured the nomination yet. Donald Trump has promised to attack Hillary Clinton on issues which have nothing to do, at least on the surface, with the successful operation and administration of government. The rest of the world is frightened to death about what's happening in our election. At the same time, they are laughing at us. We are making fools of ourselves before the world. Instead of being the enemy of the world, we have become the laughingstock of the world. I was just talking the other day with somebody who had a relative who just returned from Australia. And this person was sharing with me the extent to which in Australia his friends commented that the people in Australia are laughing at us. They can't believe how stupid we are behaving in this election. It seems to me that we may be on the cusp of what Madison predicted, what Hamilton predicted. No wonder these people don't want our young people to really read the Federalist Papers. They talk about teaching our young people America's founding documents. But they don't mean teaching the documents. They mean teaching an acceptable interpretation of those documents. Because when you read the documents, the sources, you begin to appreciate the fact that the founders laid out a formula or a strategy for this nation and the success of its Republican form of government, which is totally contradictory to what we're doing. That's why I felt compelled on last Saturday evening to post this particular piece on Facebook. To finish this by re-emphasizing or repeating Hamilton's dire warning from Federalist number 70. A feeble executive implies feeble execution of the government. A feeble execution is but another phrase for bad execution. And a government ill executed, whatever it may be in theory, must be in practice bad government. This nation is experiencing bad government because government is not being allowed to govern. And Madison made it very clear that the Constitution of the United States, based on the principle of Republican government, absolutely depends on an aggressive, visible, forceful, leadership-driven government. And we have allowed ourselves to be duped by those whose personal ambitions and private agendas demand a government that cannot govern. And they're selling it to us on the idea that it's an expansion of our individual freedom, when in fact it threatens that very freedom. That's really all I have on that issue. That addresses the matter of the Facebook posting from last Saturday evening. I think that issue is critical. I think as we sit back in horror and we watch the current election campaign move into high gear through the fall, we have to keep in mind what the stakes are. We have to remember Madison and Hamilton and the rest of them. We have to remember what the founders gave us. It is a system. It is a form of government which is so interconnected and so interdependent that all of it must function together. To basically presume to be following the Constitution of the United States and at the same time to render dysfunctional the executive branch of that government, it seems to me is absurd. Before leaving it, there's one other issue, one other comment that I can't avoid making. I hadn't planned to make it, but now that we are where we are, it seems to me, there it is. It's staring us right in the face. And that is the degree to which the Republican leadership seems to be falling into line behind Donald Trump. In what might just be the most hypocritical aspect of this whole story. The Republican leadership, in large part, not totally, but in large part, is putting aside its objections to Donald Trump and deciding that their only chance at success in November is to line up behind the candidacy of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, whose views of the executive office promises an executive so much more aggressive, so much more active, so much more visible than Barack Obama ever dreamed of, that the hypocrisy here is astounding. Trying to block every actions of a president for 8 years, and at the same time falling into line behind a candidate who promises an even more aggressive, more visible, more active executive, is hypocritical. It leads one to the conclusion that much of this is not philosophical. Rather, most of it is personal. It is not aimed at the person in the White House. It's aimed at the person who happens to be in the White House. Now, if in your mind you're thinking the next comment he's going to make is going to be related to race, I don't have to make that comment. The issues are there. But there's no question that the positions that the Senate has taken over the last 8 years in its relationships with the executive branch clearly have been driven more by the fact that Barack Obama sits in the White House than it stems from an over-aggressive executive branch. This is not theoretical. This is not ideological. This is damn personal. And how many times have we heard over the last 8 years that the man elected to be president of the United States for 2 consecutive terms by large amounts does not belong in the White House, does not fit the image of the president that we want for these United States? It seems to me you can take that for what it's worth. That's pretty much what I choose to do. A second issue, this is a totally different issue. We only have about 20 minutes left in our program today. It's not nearly enough to do justice to the issue. So I think this is one we will probably have to postpone completion of until the next time we get together. And let me take this opportunity to remind you, the next time we get together will be a week from today, next Tuesday, which I believe will be the 23rd day, or the 24th day, I can't remember, of the month. We will not be having a live program tomorrow, and we will not be having a live program here at the Virtual Center on next Monday. I'll be heading back from New England next Monday and will not am scheduled to return Monday evening. So our next program at the Virtual Center, all things being equal, should be next Tuesday. And it's probably then that we'll have to take the time to complete this issue. But I want to mention it now because it's timely. I want to mention it now because the opportunity is still there for people to get their hands on the videos of President Obama's address, commencement address, delivered this past weekend at Rutgers University. I'm guessing that many of you by now have heard, because it has started to receive a lot of attention. Many of you have probably heard comments already about President Obama's address to the 2016 graduates of Rutgers University this past weekend. It was broadcast live on C-SPAN. It was on Sunday, early Sunday afternoon, and it was repeated again at 6:30 Sunday evening. It's about 45 minutes long. It is available on a number of outlets. I'm sure it's on YouTube. It's getting a lot of attention. I do encourage those of you who would be interested in this to experience this commencement address. I think many of you who have gone through commencements, whether it be high school graduation or whether it be college graduation or whether it be a graduation from graduate school, I think all of us have experienced commencements that have been boring. This particular address was anything but boring. Because in it, President Obama raised and addressed the issues associated with what we call anti-intellectualism in America. Most particularly, he's addressing the anti-intellectualism which is engulfing our politics as we move through this election year. And he spends quite a bit of time, without naming names, coming to terms with much of what's happening in our politics. In fact, let me be honest. If I've heard any criticism of President Obama's speech, it's based on the fact that while the speech was a tremendous speech, some people believe that it was inappropriate given the setting. It was too political. It had no place at a college graduation. The criticism is that President Obama may have taken an inappropriate situation to make a profound political statement and to engage in political attack on those who disagree with him politically as well as philosophically. I'll be honest with you. When I saw the speech live, it was just an accident that I happened to flip onto C-SPAN at the time that President Obama was delivering the speech. I was prepared to turn it off, except that I know President Obama frequently delivers a pretty profound speech, pretty good speech. So I made up my mind that I would listen to the beginnings of it, but I probably would end up turning it over to another channel because I anticipated it would be somewhat a traditional what you graduates ought to do with the rest of your lives kind of speech. It was anything but that. President Obama laid out 5 strategies or 5 steps, 5 themes, if you will, that he hoped that the graduates would follow. One of the last ones being to give democracy a chance. It's messy, but it's the best. But up to that point and prior to that, he addressed a number of other issues. And the one that really caught my attention was the one about the America First sense of isolationism that seems to have become so prominent in our election campaigns. The advocacy of some to build a wall, to isolate ourselves from the rest of the world, and keep alien ideas from the rest of the world out of the United States in the form of immigrant control, in the form of keeping Muslims out of the country, and a number of other things which clearly relate to the campaign speeches and the campaign rallies of Donald Trump. President Obama never mentions Donald Trump by name. But it's clear who he's talking about. I have a number of quotes from the speech. Believe me, I can't do justice to what President Obama said like he does. That's why I encourage you to avail yourself of the opportunity to catch the president's speech as it was delivered. This is President Obama in his speech to the graduates at Rutgers University this past weekend. This is not the whole speech. It's just a couple of paragraphs. But I think it raises the issues that I want to raise. And I'm hoping that by raising them now, even though we have Actually, less than 15 minutes left. We've got about 12 minutes left in our program. What I'm hoping that this will do will be tease you enough that you'll find access to a copy of the speech and listen to it for yourself. I thought it was fabulous. But again, I tend to be a supporter of Barack Obama, so I've admitted that. But this is the president. When you hear someone longing for the good old days, take it with a grain of salt, the president said. Take it with a grain of salt. We live in a great nation, and we are rightly proud of our history. We are beneficiaries of the labor and the grit and the courage of generations who came before. But I guess it's part of human nature, especially in times of change and uncertainty, to want to look backwards and long for some imaginary past when everything worked and the economy hummed and all politicians were wise and every child was well-mannered and America pretty much did whatever it wanted around the world. Guess what? It ain't so. And at that point, the president received a lot of laughter. And then he went on, the good old days weren't that great, he says. When you hear someone longing for the good old days, they weren't that great. And then he goes on and says the following. Building walls won't change that. Isolating or disparaging Muslims, suggesting that they should be treated differently when it comes to entering this country, that is not just a betrayal of our values, that's not just a betrayal of who we are. It would alienate the very communities at home and abroad who are our most important partners in the fight against violent extremism. In other words, if we follow through on these kinds of promises, we will alienate the very people whose support we need if we're going to be successful internationally. And back to the president. Suggesting that we can build an endless wall along our borders and blame our challenges on immigrants. That doesn't run just counter to our history as the world's melting pot. It contradicts the evidence that our growth and our innovation and our dynamism has always been spurred by our ability to attract strivers from every corner of the globe. That's how we became America. Why would we want to stop it now? And then the president comes to his third point, and I told you there are 5 points that he emphasizes in this address. And he says, which brings me to my third point, and this really, for me, is the major point that I'd like to stress. Facts, evidence, reason, logic, and understanding of science. These are good things, the president said. These are qualities you want in people making policy. These are qualities you want to continue to cultivate in yourselves as citizens. Traditionally, we have valued those things. But if you've been listening to today's political debate, you might wonder where this strain of anti-intellectualism came from. In this political campaign, the president is saying, we are hearing strong evidences from people who question the legitimacy, the relevance, and the importance of evidence, of common sense, of reason, of collecting the facts, of understanding science, of the value of experimentation and the value of experience. In other words, what we are listening to in this campaign is a rejection of the Enlightenment. is a rejection of the transition out of the medieval period into the modern period in Western civilization. We are rejecting the very philosophical and political foundations of the civilization that we live in. The Enlightenment was born in opposition to the kind of blind faith that drove decision-making prior to the modern period. Up to that time, people followed and championed anti-intellectualism. They distrusted science. They distrusted experimentation. They distrusted experience. They challenged people's ability to pursue truth. They rejected and challenged the ability of people to know or to want to know. They believed instead that all truth was in Scripture, that all the important questions had already been answered, that man's goal, man's only goal, only option, was to obey, was to follow the truth and follow the script that had already been laid out for him. Not to question it, not to find alternatives to it, but to believe. And to accept the fact that to not believe in revealed truth was heresy. And going back to the medieval period and the medieval church, heresy was punishable by death. What President Obama was suggesting in this commencement speech this past weekend is that we are living in a world, in a political world, in which we are being extended or given the opportunity to return to a bygone era prior to the modern period. To return to a world in which all truth was revealed. A world in which truth was totally independent of human beings' ability to find it, to test it, to learn from it, to experiment with it, to reproduce it, or to learn from it. And by all means, man ought not to have the opportunity to take what many of these people believe is the equivalent of what Scripture calls false gods, and allow these falsities, these falsehoods, these heresies to govern what we do in the application of its principles towards society and towards man's way of living. In other words, these people are rejecting the modern world. They are rejecting man's ability to understand the world or the universe that he lives in. Never mind control it. Never mind turn it toward the benefits of mankind. Never mind all that stuff. The argument is we are to reject it from the get-go and return to all truth as being revealed. That's what many states are doing in their curriculum when they are talking about not teaching science as we understand science. Rather, teaching science as but one explanation among many, to be counterbalanced with the idea of creationism as a legitimate alternative. The implication being that some people believe one way, some people believe another way. That's the way it is. President Obama's speech raised questions about where we're going and what we're doing as a people that are being raised in this political campaign. Many citizens don't even realize it. What they are being asked to do is follow me. Follow me as I promise to make us great again. I'm not going to get into the details as to how. All I'm telling you is to trust me. Basically, what we're talking about here is a political campaign that is based upon and is being driven by ignorance. Not only is it being driven by ignorance, but it's being driven by anti-intellectualism. In other words, it's being driven by a conscious effort to challenge, belittle, and dismiss science. Dismiss education, not only dismiss education, but dismiss the educated. Reject scholarship. Reject research. Reject history. Reject the very civilization which has allowed us to get from where we were to where we are. That's the issue that this election shows signs of being about. The question is, should the President of the United States have raised these issues in a commencement speech? I would ask you to consider the alternative to that. With an audience made up predominantly of college graduates, is there a better place to raise these issues than to those who presumably will comprise the leadership of this nation tomorrow? This is one of the questions I think it's important to raise. But we can't do that today. It's 59 minutes after the hour. Our time is up together. Thank you for listening. Please tune in when we're back live next Tuesday. This is Bill O'Brien for the Virtual Center saying thank you.